title, got it. So as the title says, unlocking real momentum. And one of the things that we know is that the world is changing rapidly in so many different ways. We've already talked about AI, taking us to a whole new level, I guess, a whole new place. And one of the things that we've learned over the years is that you just can't stop the world changing, but a lot of the way we can deal with that is the key. So one of the big challenges that we now have as project leaders is how to continue to make momentum to get the results that we're looking for. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. So before I do that, I think you're all able to access the chat. I just want to start off with a few quick questions. I'm going to do a very quick quiz. Got a lot to get through, by the way, so I'm going to power through this fairly quickly. So the first one is just for those of you who've got involved in projects that involve some form of technology, which these days is pretty much all of them in any organization. So what is the mean cost overrun, overspend of technology-enabled projects? Is it A, 23%, B, 34%, C, 55%, or D, 73%? So do put in the chat what you think the answer might be. As I said, I've seen a 34% come in, a B, so a few of you are all going for B. The answer is 73%. And this is based on one of the most comprehensive projects management studies to date, a large selection of projects, and it was done by the Oxford Business School. And if for those of you want to know more, there's a fantastic book called How Big Things Get Done by Bent Flyvia and Dan Gardner. They also found, interestingly, that the bottom 18% of projects, of tech projects, that actually the mean then is something like 448%. So the message there is, especially where technology is involved, when it starts going wrong, it can go very, very wrong. So question 2, true or false? In projects and programs, choosing the right tools and the right governance is the biggest predictor of success. True or false? Okay, good, a lot of truths. The answer is false. Studies consistently show that lack of people engagement is the single biggest predictor of failure. And according to PwC and many others, actually, 70% of transformations fail due to the insufficient employee engagement. So people just simply aren't fully bought in. And we'll talk about that in this 30-minute session. So third question, question 3, true or false? Good quality communication and training are what's needed to give the project the biggest chance of success. So it's all about training and comms, in other words. Okay, a few more truths and yeses coming in. The answer is false. It's really interesting that one of the things we've learned is that the more information that we have available today, let's take, for example, world health, global health, obesity specifically. We now are in one of the worst health crises as a consequence of food, and not lack of it anymore. It's the kind of food. And that is despite having more information on nutrition today, more available information than we've ever had. So we've got more information, but we're still failing that particular topic as a human race. And the very last one, how much more successful are projects where the employees are truly engaged? Is it A, 30%, B, 55%, C, 150%, and D, 260%? Yeah, I see a few C's in there, some great optimists among you. This is fantastic, 150%. The answer is, of course, 160%, based on a number of studies. There's a recent one, really interesting. I can give you the details afterwards, called The Future of Transformation is Human. Based on it, it's an EY study, actually. I think there's a few going amongst you. And they really point to the human factor as being absolutely critical. And in fact, literally a game changer when it comes to transformations. Okay, so the question for today: why is it that smart teams with solid plans and great tools still end up in a stuck place? Now, have a little think about projects, programs, transformations that you've worked within, and ones that are not, let's say, not progressing in the way that they would like. I'm not saying they're failing necessarily, but they're just not moving fast enough. They're not getting there as fast as they would like. And yet it's rarely the case that there's not some very smart people involved. It's rarely the case that they don't have good tools or solid plans. So what's going on? You may have seen some of these things as project managers. Everybody's on board. They all say they're on board, and yet somehow you're the one who ends up doing all the chasing and maybe some of the work as well. Do any of these, maybe put a little 1 in the chat if any of these resonate with you? Those constant meetings where few decisions get taken, or it takes a long time to get decisions. Agreement but no follow-up. People getting distracted with other things. Scope creep. People raising problems more than solutions, right? So they're coming to you. All that's happening is your list of issues in the issue log is getting bigger, but they're not coming up with quite so many solutions to those problems. And the last one is the green dashboards, yeah, until all of a sudden it becomes red at the very last minute. I can see a few smiles, so I'm guessing that is something you see from time to time. Yeah. So this is very, very common. Almost every time I do a talk like this, I'm seeing patterns. They're playing out. People nodding vigorously. I can't see your heads on this particular call, but when I'm in a room with people, that's pretty much always the case. And every client we work with, they're generally in that place in some form or other. Some of these are playing out. So of course, and I think the thing is, we all know what we're aiming for, right? We all know what good looks like when we see it, yeah. Because actually, the fact is, you can actually feel when it's working right, yeah. You can feel when you're in one of those projects. And I've had the pleasure of being in some of those projects and leading some of those projects. I've also had the misfortune, let's say, to have been in the other situation too. And the reality is, when it's working, when you can literally feel the energy, and you can sense that people are fully, energized. They're in it. They want it to happen. You don't have to chase them because they're already going there on their own. Yeah, they're surfacing issues early, but also coming with the answers as well. We found this issue, but don't worry, we've already figured out some solutions or figured out an answer for it. And you end up then being the one leading, not firefighting. You're not chasing people, but you're actually guiding and leading people. And as a consequence of that, of course, the project's moving faster. You've got that momentum. You're getting there. So if any of you, hopefully you all have, been involved in a project like this, yeah, where it's going beyond expectations, because they can. And in fact, I'm going to give you a great example of this. I was working within one of the major music labels back in 2015. And I'm in New York, in that building, actually, as it happens. And beautiful day outside. I think it was in February 2015. And I've got a meeting. And I'm walking through the corridor, glass office corridor. So all these glass offices, all the doors along sitting there. And I could see Nancy's office down the end. And I'm walking along, can hear a murmur around me. But to be honest, I'm not feeling too great. In fact, I'm dreading the meeting. And I'm dreading the meeting because the last few weeks have been getting increasingly painful. I've got a sense of what's coming. And I've got a sense that I'm not going to enjoy this next conversation. So I walk into a room, and to be honest, her face already tells me everything I need to hear. And I think, to be honest, her words will just stand with me forever. I mean, this was the end of a rollout of a global operating model. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the last link in the chain, so to speak. She looked across the desk and she said, I don't know how to tell you this, she said, but I'm pulling the plug. So this was the last piece of a global transformation, and all of a sudden it had unraveled. And it wouldn't have been so frustrating if it hadn't been for the fact that a year previously, on the same global transformation, we'd been working on a project for another market, one of the biggest in the world at the time for this company, which was the UK market. And when the US, we probably spent up to a year before this conversation that I was having with Nancy. And yet in the UK, we did a very similar, in fact, we did more. And we did it in less than 4 months. The two projects were like night and day. And yes, in the UK, we had a fixed deadline. We had something we had to hit. Otherwise, the UK market they wouldn't have been able to ship product into the UK market. So yes, there were some factors. But what was really interesting throughout both those projects was the difference in the energy in the room. So in the US project, all the meetings typically were like I was describing at the beginning. You know, people were very glum. People were very distracted, often on their phones. We would have the same conversations going round and round every week. In the UK, there was an energy, there was a sense of belief, there was a sense of reaching beyond what people felt they were capable of. And as a consequence, we achieved way more in that 4 months than we had in the 12 months for the US. And that's the next thing on that is we had the same project team. We had the same leadership within the project team. We had the same people working on the project. It was the same technology and it was the same operating model. So I wonder what was going on there. That's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the things that I realized too late was there was something going on that I wasn't seeing. On the one hand, there was a lack of motivation. So imagine that this is your project you can see on screen. Now, typically you'll want your project to move in a certain direction. You want to create some momentum, okay? So let's assume you want to move from left to right, yeah? And you want to be going in that direction. That is your project moving forward, momentum. So what do you need to move something forward? Well, you need a forward force, right? And in this case, it's motivation. A motivation to change, a motivation to do something, a motivation to put those long hours in and to essentially make the project a success. A motivation to be prepared to deal with those kind of issues and things that are going to come along. And without motivation, of course, you've got nothing. And the reality in the US project was motivation was quite low. They didn't really believe in the reason for change. They had this sense that it was somebody else's project and not theirs. But there was also something else going on, something that I hadn't spotted at the time, but something that turned out to be even more fundamental and even more the reason behind, if you like, the issues. And that reason was friction. There were plenty of reasons why this was going to be very difficult and perceived to be very painful for the people involved. So if you think about the way physics works, if you want something to move in a certain direction, you have to have a strong force behind it. And of course, what works against it is that defines the strength of the force you have to have behind it. And in this case, the friction was higher than the motivation, and therefore the project ended up where it did. In the UK, however, there was a really strong motivation, and guess what? That overcame any friction, because some of that friction still existed, of course, because we're talking about the same organization, just a different part of it. So I'd like you to keep in mind that throughout of this, all of your projects, programs, transformations, whether you've got momentum or not, has pretty much everything to do with the combination of motivation and friction, and the way and the extent to which the motivation is greater than the friction. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a few minutes. So in order to do that, I'm going to use an example, a worked example. I think this translates okay. So in the UK, certainly, New Year's resolutions are definitely a thing. I did Google it this morning, and I believe that's also true in India and in Kerala specifically. But let's go with me on this. So New Year's resolutions, it's a classic, isn't it? We come out of Christmas typically, in our case, and we've probably overdone it with the food and the drink and everything else. And so we say, well, okay, I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to do something different. And often that is the thing. It could be many things. It could be write a book. It could be work fewer hours. It could be have a better work-life balance. It could be anything. But let's use an example. Let's say we've decided that, oh, and by the way, one of the things I should say is that within the UK, and it may be true, I think it's pretty much true everywhere where resolutions exist, that about 80 to 90% of them don't actually end up becoming real. In other words, we have great intentions that don't turn into the reality. Anybody experienced that? Anybody had a New Year's resolution and decided, or not decided necessarily, but just decided to forget about it? And often by the end of January, in our case, depending on when your New Year is. Put a one in the chat if you've ever had a New Year's resolution and let's just say didn't end up following it through. Well, I can tell you now, I have. So if that makes you feel any better. So let's assume that your New Year's resolution is you want to get fitter, and you've decided that you quite enjoy cycling, so you're going to make cycling your thing. And the only time you can go cycling is before work, because you've got a busy work life, and you sort of know that if you leave it to the evenings, the weekends are already full. If you leave it to the evenings, then there's a good chance it's not going to happen after a long day at work. So you've decided, right, that's it. Mornings is going to be my thing. So the first question is, what is going to make you want to do it? Well, typically we get there because we have this sense of something's not quite right for us. Okay, we may be feeling a little bit sluggish. We may be feeling we want a little bit more mental energy. We may be feeling a little bit overweight, a little bit sort of, not just want to sort things out. And what typically happens is that goes on for some time. So just breaking down motivation a little bit. So, and then what happens is we hit a point, and often New Year's is the point, where we just decide that all of a sudden, that's it, I've had enough. Yeah. I'm at that point now where I'm definitely going to sort this thing out. And that ultimately is where motivation starts. It typically starts from a place of not being happy with where you are. And I want you to keep this in mind, because this is really important when you come back to organizational change, projects, programs, transformations, because this is going through the minds of every single person that you want to get on board with your project. They go through a process whereby they may be okay, they can accept the status quo. It's not perfect, but it ain't terrible either. But when we go through New Year's resolutions, we typically get to a point where we say, right, that's enough. I am now going to change this. I'm now going to put the effort in to do something. And that ultimately is where motivation starts. And of course, the idea being that that is to move us to a place that we're much more happy with. We have in mind this place that we want to go to. Think about organizational change, right? There's the status quo and the future state. And what you're trying to do is get this process going on in the minds of the people involved. Yeah. Trying to get them to feel a sense of belief, possibility, and excitement towards this future place. So think about motivation as moving away from something and towards something. So moving away from something that's not great and towards something that is great. And remember, you're always thinking about it from the perspective of the people involved in your project or program. So if they're not moving, and if they're behaving like this team I mentioned in the US, there's a good chance that either the level of pain right now isn't strong enough, or the degree of excitement and belief in this great future isn't strong enough. So you can either present the status quo in a way that makes people concerned and ready to move, and or you can present the future state as so much better. And it's that gap that starts to create the motivation, that starts to create the intrinsic motivation, because that's really what we're talking about here. Because if all the motivation is coming from you, extrinsic motivation is coming from the outside, coming from you, then that is going to be a hard one to crack. Does that make sense so far? I'm going to pause for a second in case we've got any, yeah, nothing coming through on the chat. I'm just checking. I don't think anyway. Okay. So let's just say you've decided to do your exercise routine, your bike ride before work, and you've decided you have to get up at 5 a.m. Now, is it likely that when it comes to the first morning that you've decided to do that, in our case in January, it tends to be very cold and very dark. So is it very likely that 5 a.m. on Monday morning, you're going to find out just exactly how strong your motivation is? Yes or no? Yeah? You're going to find out just how strong, how likely it is that you're going to do your thing, your bike ride. Remember, it's cold outside and it's dark. It feels like the middle of the night. And you're in bed and you've got to get yourself out. Okay. And then you've decided you need to find all of your cycling gear because you didn't put it in a place where you could easily get your hands on it. So you're now fumbling around in the dark trying to find your cycling stuff. And eventually you find your cycling stuff and you go downstairs and your lovely little dog has decided to leave you a little message for later, something that you're going to have to clear up. So you have to sort that out. And then you get to the shed and your bike has got a puncture. So what do you think your energy levels are like? Assuming you got yourself out of bed in the first place, by the time you've got through all of these different obstacles, what do you think your energy levels are going to be like by the time you get on that bike, even if you make it to that bike? It's going to become harder, isn't it? It's becoming more challenging. And this is, of course, what happens in businesses, in projects, programs, in transformations, is that even if people were motivated in the start, what happens is that it becomes hard to get things done. The way the organization runs, it's difficult to make things happen. There's plenty of people all pulling in different directions. Maybe it's long hours. Maybe it's sign-off processes take too long. Lots and lots of things that we know go on in the day-to-day that make it really hard to change. So if that motivation isn't strong enough, what's going to happen? Yeah, it becomes very likely that people will start to lose energy. They will start to give up. So that, going back to that motivation friction slide, what's going to happen? The friction is going to undermine the motivation, right? Make sense? Yes or no? Yeah, makes sense. Good. Okay. So let's just make it really practical. So assuming that you want to create some momentum in your project or program, you've got two choices. The first one is you can increase the motivation. And the second one is you can start to reduce the friction. You can start to bring that friction down so it's more likely that change will move ahead. And going back to the US project, of course, what happened was the motivation was low and the friction was high. So had I seen this at the time, then my choices would have been to reduce the friction, to figure out what was getting in their way, what was making it hard, or to increase the motivation. So in essence, the things I would encourage you to focus on, if you're struggling with momentum, look at both sides of the equation. See what you can do to drive up motivation, and then have a look at what you can do to reduce friction. So just to give you a little checklist of things that typically we see coming up time and time again with clients. The first one is, do they feel the need to change? Notice I use the word feel because this is an emotional process. And what typically happens is we stop at the slide deck, don't we? Do they feel the need to change? Do they understand for themselves why it's important for them to change? Do they really feel it? Are they feeling the urgency to change? because you know what? We can all procrastinate. Going back to our New Year's resolution, right? We could have put that off to February or March or never, because we tend to do that, don't we, as humans? So they need to feel the urgency. They need to feel that it's important to move now rather than defer to later. Do they know what's in it for them? Yeah, because in the end, that's what they're going to be judging this project or program on. To what extent is their life going to be better? To what extent will they be able to do their job better, more effectively, more efficiently, serve customers, whatever the thing is that people are doing that your project or program is affecting? To what extent will it be better for them? Because we don't do that, do we? We tend to talk about why it's good for the organization. We tend to do that, don't we? And as a consequence, people check out and they carry on and do their other thing. And the last one here is, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I think if you start with this, you're generally going to get pretty darn far. Another one is, we tend to work in groups, okay? So to what extent are those around them committed? So if you can create a critical mass of movement, a critical mass of energy and commitment to the project, it's far more likely you're going to get others on board. So to what extent of those committed? And that's especially true of leaders. Okay, the number of projects I see where when we get into it, you know, we're day in helping a leadership team to figure out what's going on with their project and not getting the momentum we look for. And then you suddenly find that certain influential people in the organization are just by their behaviors not demonstrating that they're on board. In fact, they're doing the opposite. So it's really important then to look out for this kind of stuff. So just on that checklist alone, if you're struggling with momentum, just ask yourself those 4 questions on motivation. And then take a look at the friction. So 4 things to look at there. First one, do the people involved feel safe? Do they feel safe to experiment? Do they feel safe that once they get involved and on board with this, that they won't be judged? Yeah, that they won't be left feeling inadequate in some way because they don't have the skills or the knowledge. They won't be in fear of their job as a consequence. Do they feel safe? Because if they don't, the project is going to come under pressure straight away. They will check out. The next one is, does the change feel achievable? Do people feel they can actually do it? Does it feel that, do they understand what they need to do to make it a success? And do they believe they can do it? The third one is, are there any downsides for the people involved? And of course, sometimes there will be. So the answer is, how can you mitigate those downsides? How can you ensure that people feel accepting of them? And that is a bit of a process. Okay? So what can you do there? And the last thing is, are there any obvious obstacles getting in people's way, making it difficult for them to do what needs to be done? And what can you as project leader do to reduce those? So remember, what you're doing is bringing down the friction and bringing up the motivation. And that's how you start to create momentum. So very quickly, there's a few of the organizations we've worked with over the years. It's just a small number of them. But what we see across all of them is the same principles playing out time and time again. And it actually doesn't matter what the industry is. It doesn't matter what the topic of the project or program is, whether it's technology, culture, you'll see the same principles playing out because they're human principles. They're based on people. So if you understand what is the level of motivation for people and what's getting in their way, that's already going to give you a superhuman head start by comparison to many project leaders actually in this space. So very last one, and this is where I open up to questions. We have a short guide, which you're more than welcome to download. It's free to download. How to, really what's getting in the way, and some fast track stuff to get it going again. So at this point, I'm going to take some questions. I think I just want to check timings was. I think that was about the 30-minute mark.
Yeah, Mark, you're on track.
Great.
Thank you, Mark. and we'll have a Q&A session probably for a few minutes, approximately 10 max. And if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hands and or basically unmute yourself and ask, or in case you want to put it in the chat, you can put it in the chat as well, which I can read out for Mark.
First question, was that useful for everyone?
Yes, Mark.
Some thumbs up there.
So yeah, maybe I would like to ask one question, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, hi Mark, Purnima this side. So my question is, yes, you showed us how we have to, increase our motivation with a checklist and reduce the friction. But the checklist that we have, it says, do they feel the need to change? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That is like one of the points in our checklist. So whom do we ask this? And if we ask, are we going to get the right answer?
Yes, good question. Right. And of course, a lot of that does depend on relationships. It depends on the relationship you have. So let me answer the first question first. And the first question is, who do we ask? And the answer to that question is it's the person that you need on board in order to make your project a success. Now, it could be somebody in the project team, or it could be somebody who's at the other end of the project. In other words, will be using the end product of the project. Because, of course, the reason we do these projects is to have some benefit for the organization and therefore the people involved. Okay, so it's always an aim to make the world better in some way, or generally speaking, it is. Otherwise, why do the project? So so the answer to your question is whoever it is that you're seeking to get engaged, those are the people you need to understand to what extent. It's just a simple question. Why would they get on board? Why would they do it? Why would they do whatever needs to be done for the project? And yes, you can argue that, people come to work and they have to do the things they're told to do. And that's more true in some cultures than others, for sure. But I can tell you in all cultures, actually, when people feel that sense of desiring something, your job as project leader becomes so much more easy. Yeah, it becomes so much easier to lead people who already want the thing that you want. And so that's really what I'm talking about here. So it could be project team members, it could be other managers in your organization, because sometimes as project managers, we end up, don't we, wedged between senior leadership on the one hand, putting pressure on us to get things done, and on the other hand, the teams that we have that need to make it happen. So we've got ambivalence coming up and pressure coming down, and that's not a happy place for project leaders. So this is really all about getting that alignment across all of them. So all of the people that you need to make your project successful. So now we call them stakeholders, right? Typically, that would be the answer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Mark, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. There was a second part of the question, and it's gone out of my head. Just remind me. That was who and
yeah. Are we going to get the correct answer for those questions?
Yes, right. And that is partly down to the relationship. We also have a tool actually called Change Journey Navigator that we use to help. It's essentially anonymous. That's the word I was looking for. An anonymous assessment process that we go through with clients, and it's really interesting what it surfaces, things that leaders didn't know. So I'd be very happy to talk to you about that as well offline if needed. But there's various methods and tools you can use. The thing with a face-to-face conversation is it can work for some people. Others, depending on your position compared to theirs, they may or may not feel, let's say, brave enough to say what they really think. That can be an issue. But that's all about building the relationships and creating an environment where people feel they can tell you not just what they think you want to hear, but what you what you need to hear actually, which can sometimes be an uncomfortable truth.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, you're welcome.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Mark? Thank you for the presentation. My name is John.
Yes, of course.
I mentioned that the project didn't work in US, but it worked in UK. So does it
Yeah.
have something to deal with the culture or style in the US and which is different in UK? So does geography play a part, a significant part, or
Yes.
can we handle the situation with good relationship even in the US?
So yes, the answer was it was multifaceted. In the end, it came back to that dynamic that I mentioned, the motivation friction dynamic. One of the key things in the US that I hadn't really appreciated to the extent that it mattered was the US has a culture which is effectively like a very short-term employment contracts in essence. So it meant that people tended to be very defensive and very unwilling to take any risks that could potentially impact on themselves. Because attached to a job, of course, is healthcare, schooling, and many, many other things. So it can be quite disastrous for many people, especially people who don't have lots of savings or whatever. So they very tend to be very protective of their job, and I maybe underestimated that at the time, the extent to which that was a problem. That was just one of many factors, but it was an important one because what it meant was, and what I was seeing, and I'd maybe misunderstood it as more of a motivation issue, but it was also a major friction issue, was that people were protecting themselves. And as a consequence, they didn't want to do anything that they perceived might be tricky for a while. Whereas in the UK, they knew they had to do this thing. The leadership team were fully on board. They were prepared to accept any risks associated with the project and everything else that went with it. Whereas in the US, that wasn't true. And the leadership team was far more distant, less engaged, and really almost, people were getting that sense that they were waiting for it to fail. So yes, there was a culture issue playing out, but that doesn't mean to say that those things are not, it can't be addressed, because in the end, they're all human factors. Okay. So, but because we didn't see the problem clearly enough, we weren't taking the actions needed to fix the real problem. We were fixing what we thought was the problem. Yeah. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So do feel free to. Oh, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
Hi, Mark. Jyotis here. Thanks for the great presentation. I have very a practical question here, just to see how we can actually go ahead in fast-paced environments. In your experience, which one tends to have a bigger impact on project outcomes? Is it boosting the team motivation or removing friction?
Yeah, the answer is it absolutely depends on the situation in that moment for that team. Something as simple as, if you think back to the COVID period, there were many projects that were people were highly motivated, they were ready, they were getting involved. And then all of a sudden the world changed. And therefore people were starting to get more fearful about things. They're starting to get a little bit less brave and take the sort of risks that they were going to take. So what I've noticed in projects and programs is you can even start off with a very good, very high levels of motivation, relatively low friction, or the friction's being dealt with well. And then a few months in, something changes. And that may not be a global thing. It may be something, maybe a competitive thing. It may be just a leadership change, or certain things going on in the organization suddenly start to create elements of friction. A classic one, of course, is where a senior leader decides to spin up another project, which then ends up competing for resources with the project that you're working on. So things like that can very quickly undermine a project, and it can happen really quickly. So typically what we do with clients, certainly if the ones that are using Navigator, is we would pulse projects over a period of time to look for things that have changed and look for changes in the sentiment, changes in the the concerns, beliefs, perspectives of the people involved in the project. I mean, I'd be happy enough to share if you've got specifics, but yeah, it's no generalized answer. I suppose what I would say is whenever I survey projects, programs with organizations, almost always people are not as motivated as leaders think they are to get the thing done. So motivation is always a good place to start, because wherever you're at, you can always increase it, right? So, and there's often a lot of opportunity left on the table here, because simply because leaders aren't talking sort of frankly enough about the reality that the organization's in. I mean, most organizations these days, if you're not embracing, for example, AI and various other technologies, there's a good chance your competitors are, but that often isn't translated to the people deep in the workforce who are quite happy to continue as they are. But the reality is they're not seeing the bigger reality, which is that things have to change. So there's lots and lots of tools you can use to sort of ramp up that desire for change, that urgency for change within people's minds, that gets them feeling a sense that they want to do it. And then, of course, giving them something really compelling, really bright to move towards. And pretty much every time we come in to support a client, that is what we see. Motivation is generally, is generally low, but as is friction. So it depends.
Thanks.
So
Mark.
the guide
that
that I've
totally
put up
makes
there, by
sense.
the way. Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I would say just go through. I mean, even with the checklist, go through with your team and ask yourselves honestly, right? Even the immediate project team, and you'll be amazed what comes out. And often it's we don't know. Okay, we don't know, and that is part of the problem. We don't know to the extent to which people feel a sense of urgency. So go find out. Go find out, because I can guarantee you, without any shadow of doubt, all of the projects that I've been involved in, and whenever we see a stuck project, it's always the same combination. I guarantee that friction is greater than motivation.
Yes. I think the COVID example was a great one. It really taught us how essential both trust and simplification are when working remotely under pressure. So yeah, and that's a great example.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also, actually, if you think about what got achieved during COVID that would have otherwise not, we'd taken many years even to get people on video conferencing. I know most of the organizations I was working with, people were stuck on audio conferencing, phone conferencing. Despite the tools being available, and all of a sudden, globally, we embraced video conferencing in a very short space of time. And we also embraced and moved all kinds of obstacles to get vaccines created because the motivation was high. Okay, lives were at risk. And it's amazing, when that motivation was high, all of the usual friction that would slow down, for example, the vaccine creation, just suddenly went away. People found their way through it because the motivation was high enough. And that's everybody: governments, individuals, scientists, institutions, all got behind it to make it a success. Yeah, I mean, it's almost one of the best behavioral experiments that we'll ever see in most of us in our lifetime, I think.
True. Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. Thanks again, Mark.
So do feel free to grab yourself a copy of the guide. My thing, all of us in life, things get very complicated for people, right? Especially the sort of the human behavioral stuff. It can seem really complicated. It really doesn't need to be. So I'm on a mission to simplify this stuff. And I'd love to, grab the guide, give me your feedback. Typically what I do is, once you download the guide, I'll send you via email stuff that's useful, practical, that you can literally take away and apply. That's my promise to you. So, and if you feedback, if you ask me questions, I'll give you the best answer I can. So, yeah, go grab yourself a copy and yeah, let me know how you get on. So I'd love to hear.
Do you have time for one more question, Mark?
I do, certainly, if Vimal's okay.
Look, COVID was a turning point, is what we have generally seen for conferencing and team meetings. And based on your experience, like how much has people's behavior evolved? Like sometimes technology also threatens, you know? It makes people's jobs a little insecure. So does that play a good part in people's behavior? Like someone asked a question, like, can we really get the answers? So that's like people may not speak up. They don't mean what they try to tell. So
Yeah.
has it over time after COVID, has it reached a point where like there's a lack of trust, or we really can't take a people at face value of what they are trying to express or what they are telling? Maybe what they are telling is not what they really mean. So does that kind of behavior percolated? Has it impacted project all across based on your experience?
Yeah, I'd say undoubtedly yes. And I'll explain why. If you think about the way we interact with each other, I mean, you're looking at the top half of me at the moment, and one of the signals you're picking up from me is my body language. Yeah. And humans are fantastically good at this stuff, but you've only got part of the picture, and even less if people aren't on camera. Okay, so you've then only got the voice. There's some studies about emotional connection and getting emotional messages across, and most of what we do is emotionally driven. As Morabians, you know, something like 55% is to do with the visuals, you know, our sort of body language and everything else. 38% is to do with our tonality, how we speak, you know, the timbre, everything else. And something like whatever's left, it's something like 8% is to do with the actual words themselves. And if you're on hearing only, you're only hearing the words. So you've missed a whole range of communication possibility as a consequence of that. And so without a shadow of doubt, and I see this myself as well in certainly doing these kinds of events, is the difference in energy when you've got people in a room is immeasurable. So I would argue that we know that, you know, the realities of life are that we work remotely, and, you know, many of us, that is our reality, and you have to make the best of it. But without a shadow of doubt, if you want to do a workshop or you have the opportunity to get together, my recommendation is take it, because the human to human interaction when you're face to face is so much better. So much better. You pick up so many more signals than you ever will. And that's where trust begins to build, to your point, you know, and people struggle, especially on a big conference situation like this. It's very likely that people won't speak up because they feel, they just don't feel as comfortable. It's a whole different situation if you're all sat around a table looking at each other, picking up each other's signals, and, you know, people get much more comfortable in that scenario. As a generalization. But yeah, that's my, yeah. So hopefully that was useful.
Thank you. It does.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. Talking about people, human behavior is quite interesting, and this discussion will go on for a long time. So I do understand that a lot of you have more questions for Mark, and I believe Mark wouldn't mind you reaching out to him on his email, which is given there.
Yeah, I'll put my LinkedIn as well in case some of you, let me just find that. I've got it here. But yeah, do reach out. Email is fine too. So that was my LinkedIn going in, I think. Oh, there it is. There we go. Hopefully you can see that now. Oh, here you go. That's finally got there. Yes. So feel free to, I've done it twice now. Feel free to drop me a note via email on LinkedIn. As I say, download the guide. It's free. And with that comes all kinds of tips and things that are advanced. Oops. Yeah. So as I said, let me move that back. Yeah. So feel free to grab yourself a copy of that. As I said, I'll get in touch with you with all kinds of other useful tips and tricks. Yeah, and I'd love to hear from you again. Thank you so much as well to the PMI in Kerala for inviting me, and wishing you all the very best for the conference.
Thanks, Mark. Okay.
Thank you.
Let me just share my slide while I do the closing.
So I'll stop sharing my slide now.
As we wrap up today's pre-conference session, I would once again extend a big thank you to our speaker, Mark, for sharing this deep, insightful session, and really diving deep into human behavior and how change can be brought in. For reminding us that the real levers of transformation lies beyond just tools and templates. Thanks also to our Waves leadership and to each of you for joining us today and kickstarting this journey towards Wave 2025. The